Before we begin, make yourself comfortable and turn down the lights. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. We love reading your thoughts after each story. 7 creepy true Halloween stories from people who never forgot. Story 1. The Smiling Man in the Corn Maze. I was 17 years old when it happened, and I'm 43 now. I've never told anyone the full story because I knew nobody would believe me. But every single detail is burned into my memory like a brand, and I can recall it as vividly today as I could the morning after it occurred. It was Halloween night, 1998, and my friends and I thought we were invincible. My name is Robert, and back then, I lived in a small farming community in rural Ohio. Our town wasn't much, just a few thousand people scattered across miles of farmland and forest. But every October, the Hartley farm would open up their corn maze for the season. It was a big deal for us. Hundreds of people would show up throughout the month to navigate the twisting paths cut through the massive cornfield. The maze was professionally designed, taking about 40 minutes to complete if you knew what you were doing. If you didn't, you could wander for hours. That particular Halloween was unseasonably warm. The kind of October night where you don't need a jacket, and the air carries that crisp, almost electric feeling. My best friend Marcus, his girlfriend Jennifer, and 2 other friends, David and Sarah, decided we'd hit up the maze around 9 in the evening. We were cocky about it. We'd done it before. We figured we'd knock it out quickly and then head to the bonfire they were having near the barn. The entrance was lit with jack-o'-lanterns, and there was a small booth where they checked you in. An older man, probably in his 60s, took our money. He had this expression on his face. I remember it clearly, something between a warning and sadness. He told us we had until 11 when they'd close the maze down. It wasn't a suggestion. It sounded like a deadline we needed to respect. When Marcus asked why, the old man didn't answer. He just handed us our entry tickets and looked away, helping another group. The 5 of us entered the maze at around 9:15. The paths were about 7 feet high, just tall enough that you couldn't see over the corn walls. They'd left small clearings at various intersections where signs would direct you, though the signs were intentionally confusing to make it fun. What I didn't know then was that we should have paid better attention to those clearings. We should have been counting them. For the first 20 minutes, we laughed and joked, taking wrong turns deliberately, enjoying the maze itself rather than rushing through it. The cornfield was eerily quiet despite being full of people. You could hear groups in other sections of the maze, but their voices sounded distant, muffled by the thick corn stalks. The night was so dark. The farm only had a few lights set up around the perimeter, and none of them penetrated deep into the maze itself. That's when I first saw him. He was standing in one of the clearings ahead of us, maybe 30 feet away. At first, I thought it was another person trying to navigate the maze. But something about him was wrong. I couldn't quite place it. His posture was too still, too perfect. He was wearing dark clothes, a dark suit actually, which struck me as bizarre for a corn maze on Halloween. He was just standing there, facing our direction, and even in the dim light, I could see his face. He was smiling. Not a nervous smile, or a friendly smile. It was stretched too wide, too deliberate. "Who is that?" Sarah whispered. She'd seen him too. "Some guy," Marcus said, but even his voice had lost its earlier levity. "Come on, let's keep moving." We took a different path, avoiding the clearing where the man stood. But I kept looking back over my shoulder. He hadn't moved. He was still just standing there, that impossible smile fixed on his face, watching us walk away. We tried to shake it off. We were 17. We rationalized it. Some weird guy in a costume, probably trying to scare people in the maze. It was Halloween, after all. But the energy between us had shifted. The playful atmosphere evaporated, replaced by something tense and uncomfortable. We navigated through several more sections, deliberately staying away from that clearing. But then David pointed out that we'd come back around to a section we recognized. We were going in circles. In a maze designed to take 40 minutes, we'd been walking for nearly an hour, and we were clearly lost. We need to see the overall layout, Marcus said. Maybe if we climb up, we can see over the corn. Against my instinct, we all agreed. Marcus was tall and athletic, so he attempted to climb the corn stalks. About 5 feet up, the stalks started bending under his weight. He managed to get his head above the line of the maze for just a few seconds before dropping back down. I saw the exit, he said, breathing hard. It's north of here. If we keep going north, we should hit it. We started moving north, or at least what we thought was north. The corn all looked the same. Every path looked like every other path. After another 15 minutes of walking, none of us talking much, we came into a large clearing. Larger than the others. It was almost a circle of open space, maybe 40 feet across. And there he was, the smiling man, waiting right in the center. This time, there was no doubt. He wasn't just standing there passively. He was waiting for us. His smile was still stretched across his face, and even though the darkness made it hard to see details, I could see his eyes. They were tracking us. Watching. The suit hung loose on his frame in a way that made him look almost skeletal. Is this part of the maze? Jennifer asked weakly. Like part of the Halloween thing? Nobody answered her because we all knew it wasn't. Let's go back, I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. Let's go back to the entrance and ask the old man how to get out. He's between us and the path we came from, David said. His voice was shaking. The man's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His smile somehow got wider, his lips stretching back impossibly far. Then he raised his right arm, the hand opening and closing in a slow, deliberate beckoning motion. Come here. Come here. Come here. Something about that gesture broke whatever paralysis had gripped us. We ran. We just turned and ran through the maze, abandoning any sense of strategy or direction. I was in a full panic. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. Behind us, I could hear something. Not footsteps. It was harder to describe than that. A rustling sound, different from the corn moving naturally. It sounded deliberate. Purposeful. We crashed through several dead ends, backtracking, running in what I'm certain was no particular direction. The corn scratched at our faces and arms, drawing blood. We were screaming, all of us. I remember Jennifer's wails particularly. Marcus was shouting something, but I couldn't make out the words. And then, suddenly, light. We burst out of a section of corn into another clearing, but this one had something we recognized. One of the illuminated signs pointing toward the exit. We followed it, still running, not looking back. The sounds behind us had stopped, but we didn't care. We ran all the way to the entrance, where the old man was standing with a flashlight. He took one look at us, bleeding, scratched, wild-eyed and gasping for air, and his expression didn't change. He just nodded, like this was exactly what he expected. Did you see him? He asked quietly. None of us answered. We were too out of breath, too traumatized to form words. He comes out on Halloween nights when the maze is open. The old man continued, as if we'd confirmed it. Sometimes he takes people. Sometimes he just scares them. Sometimes. He trailed off, looking back into the darkness of the maze. Sometimes I'm not sure what he does. But he's been here long before I ever ran this farm. The property has history. Not good history. We didn't wait for more. We ran to Marcus's car and drove away, our tires kicking up gravel from the farm's driveway. We never talked about it much after that night. It was like we'd made some unspoken agreement to let it fade into the background, to pretend it hadn't been real. But we all knew what we'd experienced. We all remembered that smile. We all remembered the beckoning gesture. To this day, I've never gone back to that farm. I never returned to that corn maze. And I never will. What I saw that night wasn't human, or if it was something fundamentally wrong with what a human being should be. Every Halloween, when October 30th comes around, I think about that old man's words. I think about what that thing might have been. And I'm grateful, deeply grateful, that we made it out when we did. because something tells me that not everyone does. The old man closed that maze down 2 years later. The property was sold. I heard through the grapevine that a housing development tried to buy it, but the deal fell through. Nobody ever explained why. I've never driven past it since we fled that night. I don't have any desire to know what's happened to it. Some things are better left buried in the past, especially when they smile like that. Story 2: The Passenger. My name is Diana, and I'm a rideshare driver in Portland, Oregon. I've been driving for 5 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. People get drunk, they cry, they argue with their partners on the phone. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened on Halloween night of 2019. I typically work evenings, starting around 6 o'clock and going until midnight or later. Halloween nights are always busy. People want to go to parties, bars, haunted houses, all the seasonal attractions. I usually make good money on Halloween, which is why I decided to work that particular night. I was saving for a down payment on a house, and every extra shift brought me closer to that goal. The evening had been normal enough. I'd picked up a group of girls in witch costumes, a couple heading to a party, a man in a vampire outfit heading downtown. All typical Halloween fare. By around 11 o'clock, I was ready to call it a night. I was tired, and pickups were becoming sparse. I decided I'd do one more run and then head home. A request came through for a pickup in a residential area about 10 minutes away. The location was in a neighborhood I knew well, older houses, tree-lined streets, quiet. The pickup address was on Maple Street, a house set back from the road. I didn't think twice about it. I accepted the ride and headed over. When I pulled up to the address, I saw a figure standing on the curb. It was a man, and he was dressed in a very realistic plague doctor costume. The outfit was impressive, actually, the long dark coat, the leather gloves, the mask with the distinctive long beak. He looked like he'd stepped out of a historical reenactment. He climbed into the back seat without saying anything, just a polite nod in my direction. "Hi there," I said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Where are we heading tonight?" "Meadowbrook Avenue," he said, his voice muffled slightly by the mask. "Do you know it?" I did. It was across town, a good 15-minute drive depending on traffic. At 11 o'clock at night, traffic would be minimal. "Sure thing," I said, and started driving. We rode in silence for the first few minutes. I had music playing quietly, and I kept an eye on him in the mirror. He was absolutely still, staring out the window. The plague doctor mask was so realistic that even though I could see his eyes behind the eye holes, it was unsettling. The long beak pointed forward, and the entire effect was genuinely eerie. I assumed he was heading to some kind of Halloween party or bar crawl in that area. After about 5 minutes, I tried to make conversation, as I usually do with passengers. "Nice costume," I said. "Are you heading to a party?" He turned his head to look at me, and even though I knew he was just a passenger in my car, something about the slow, deliberate movement made my skin prickle. "Of sorts," he said. "I'm visiting someone." "Well, I hope you have a great Halloween," I said, trying to sound cheerful despite my growing unease. I turned my attention back to the road. We drove on. I merged onto a main road that would take us toward Meadowbrook Avenue. At this time of night, the streets were fairly empty. I passed some groups of late-night trick-or-treaters, a few cars heading in the opposite direction. Everything was normal, and yet something felt profoundly wrong. About 10 minutes into the drive, I realized I hadn't heard any sound from the back seat. No shifting, no phone notifications, nothing. I glanced in the mirror. He was in the exact same position, head turned toward the window, completely motionless. "Are you doing okay back there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. My heart rate picked up slightly. "Sir? Are you all right?" Still nothing. I adjusted the mirror to get a better look at him. In the back seat, the plague doctor sat in exactly the same position, his head still turned toward the window. But something about him was different. His posture seemed flat. Like he wasn't breathing. Like his chest wasn't moving. I pulled over to the side of the road. "Hey," I called back, louder this time. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. I put the car in park and turned around in my seat to look at him directly. The beaked mask stared straight ahead, the eye holes absolutely black in the dim light of my car's interior. I reached back and touched his arm. It was ice cold. I screamed. I literally screamed, a sound I didn't even know I was capable of making. I scrambled out of the driver's seat and yanked the back door open. The figure didn't move. It was completely rigid, like a mannequin. I reached down and grabbed at the costume, trying to lift the mask, and the entire thing came off in my hands. What was beneath was... I still struggled to describe it. The face was wrong. The features seemed to shift and blur in the street light. I couldn't focus on it. It was like my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Skin that was too pale, features that were too elongated, and when I looked at where the mouth should have been, it was just a slit. A thin, terrible slit. I dropped the mask and stumbled backward. I was hyperventilating, on the verge of passing out. I fumbled with my phone to call 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the buttons. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher asked. I couldn't form words. I pointed back at my car, at the figure in the back seat. But when I looked, the back seat was empty. Completely empty. There was nothing there. No figure, no costume, nothing. "Ma'am? Can you hear me? What's your emergency?" the dispatcher was asking. I checked the road. Empty. I checked all around my car. The plague doctor mask lay on the ground where I dropped it, but the costume, the figure, everything else had vanished. I picked up the mask with a stick I found on the roadside, terrified to touch it directly. It looked like a normal costume mask. Well made, realistic, but just a mask. I threw it in my trunk and drove home with every door locked, my hands shaking the entire way. The police came to my apartment. They took a statement. They examined the mask, which I'd placed in a plastic bag. They were professional but skeptical. There was no body, no evidence of foul play. I'd picked up someone, they got out, the ride ended. The mask? Maybe I'd had something in my trunk all along and forgotten about it. Stress, Halloween, late-night driving, these things could play tricks on the mind. I haven't driven since that night. I quit my job 3 days later. I told my boss I was having health issues, and I couldn't continue. I've been living off my savings and some part-time work, but I can't get back in that car. The thought of picking up another passenger, of having someone sit in that back seat, makes my stomach turn to acid. What disturbs me most is that I still have the pickup record in my rideshare app. I can pull it up anytime. The passenger name is just a first initial and a last name, M. Blackwood. There's a phone number associated with it, but when I called it once, in a moment of morbid curiosity, it just rang and rang. Nobody answered. I've checked the app rating for that ride dozens of times. There's no rating left by the passenger. But there's a comment from me. And I can't bring myself to delete it. For stars, and in the notes, I wrote something I don't remember writing. He's still here. He's still looking for someone. I didn't write that. I know I didn't. But when I try to delete it, it reappears the next day, sometimes with different wording. Sometimes it says, "He's waiting," or "He's hungry," or just, "He's coming." I moved out of Portland 6 months after that night. I live in a small town in Northern California now, working retail at a local store. I don't drive for rideshare anymore. I don't even use the app to request rides. I walk, I bike, I ask friends for rides when I need them. But last October, a month before Halloween, I got a ride request notification on my phone. I don't know how it happened. My app should have been deactivated for years. The pickup location was my current address, and the passenger name was M. Blackwood. I didn't respond. I deleted the app entirely that day. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he's still waiting for that ride. I wonder if he's still looking through the driver pool for someone named Diana, someone from Portland, someone who remembers the plague doctor on Maple Street. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't pulled over. Where was he taking me? What was I supposed to find at that address on Meadowbrook Avenue? I've never looked it up. I'm afraid of what I might discover. Some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved, and some passengers should never reach their destination. Story 3: The Trick-or-Treater. My name is Kevin, and I'm a high school history teacher in suburban Massachusetts. I've been teaching for 12 years, and I pride myself on being rational, logical, and grounded in reality. Which is precisely why what happened to me is so difficult to talk about. Because if I don't understand it, and I'm someone who deals in facts and evidence every single day, then what hope does anyone else have of making sense of it? This happened when I was 28 years old, which was about 7 years ago. I was working at my first teaching position at a middle school in a quiet town called Ashford. The school was in a nice neighborhood, the kind of place where families had lived for generations, where houses were well maintained and yards were fenced in. It felt safe. It felt like the kind of place where bad things didn't happen. My apartment was a rental, just a few streets over from the school. I lived alone. I was recently divorced, and I was still in that phase where solitude felt more comfortable than seeking out social situations. Halloween that year fell on a Tuesday. I wasn't going out. I wasn't having friends over. I'd bought some candy for trick-or-treaters, figuring I'd hand it out and then spend the evening grading papers or watching a movie. A quiet, unremarkable evening. Around 6 o'clock, the first groups of trick-or-treaters started showing up. The usual costumes: superheroes, princesses, vampires, witches. I'd stand at the door, drop some candy into their bags, smile at the kids and their parents. It was pleasant in a low-key way. By 8 o'clock, things had quieted down significantly. Most families had finished their trick-or-treating and were heading home. I figured I was done for the night. At around 8:30, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find a single child standing on my porch. She looked to be about 8 or 9 years old, and she was wearing a very old-fashioned costume. It was a white dress, the kind that might have been from the early 1900s, floor-length, high-necked, with lace trim. Her face was painted white like a porcelain doll, with a red mouth and black eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back in tight braids. She was carrying a small jack-o'-lantern bucket for candy. What struck me as odd was that she was alone. Every other child I'd seen that night had been with a parent or a group of older kids. This girl was by herself. "Trick or treat," she said, but her voice was wrong. It was flat, monotone, like she was reading from a script she didn't quite understand. "Hi there," I said, reaching into my candy bowl. "That's a great costume. Are you out with your parents?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me with her painted doll eyes, waiting for candy. I felt a slight chill run down my spine, but I dismissed it. I dropped some candy into her bucket. "Have a great Halloween," I said, starting to close the door. "Wait," she said. Her voice was still that same flat, emotionless tone. "Can I come inside? It's cold." Every parental warning I'd ever heard screamed in my head. A strange child, alone, asking to come into my home. Every instinct told me to say no. "I'm sorry, sweetie, but I can't let you come inside. You should get back to your parents." "Where do they live?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me with those painted doll eyes. Then, very slowly, she smiled. It was a deliberate smile, mechanical, like a doll's face being manipulated by invisible strings. "They're coming," she said. "Who's coming?" I asked, though something in my gut was already telling me I didn't want to know the answer. "The others," she said. "They're coming to collect you." I slammed the door and locked it. My heart was hammering. I told myself I was overreacting. It was probably just some kid trying to scare me, thinking she was being clever. Kids that age sometimes did things like that. It was probably a neighborhood prank. I went to the window and peeked through the curtains. The girl was still standing on my porch, completely motionless, staring at my front door. Not looking at anything else, just staring directly at the spot where I'd been standing. I turned on all the lights in my apartment. I locked the back door, checked all the windows. Everything was secure. I sat on my couch and tried to focus on something, anything else, but I couldn't stop thinking about that girl. About her voice. About those words. "They're coming to collect you." At 9 o'clock, there was another knock. I approached the door slowly and looked through the peephole. There were 3 more children standing on my porch. They were all dressed in old-fashioned costumes, similar to the first girl's. One was a boy in a Victorian suit, another was a girl in a high-collared dress from what looked like the 1800s, and the third was dressed in what might have been turn-of-the-century clothing. All of them had white painted faces and the same mechanical, doll-like appearance. All of them were staring directly at my door. I didn't open it. I stepped back from the peephole and called the police. "There are children on my porch who won't leave," I told the dispatcher. "They're scaring me. I think something might be wrong." The dispatcher said they'd send someone over. I was told to stay inside and lock my doors, which I'd already done. I looked through the peephole again. The 4 children were still there, and now they were turning their heads, very slowly, in unison, all looking in the same direction, down the street. Through the peephole, I could see more figures approaching down the sidewalk. More children, more teenagers, all in old-fashioned costumes, all with white painted faces and that same eerie, doll-like quality. There must have been 20 of them, maybe more. They were moving slowly, deliberately, all converging on my house. I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone. I dialed 911 again. "They're here," I said, my voice shaking. "There are dozens of them. Please send someone now." "Sir, stay calm. Officers are en route. What's your current location?" I gave them my address again, and they assured me help was coming. I wasn't sure how long I had. The figures outside weren't making any noise. They weren't trying to break down the door or yell demands. They were just standing there, surrounding my house, all of them facing my door, all of them completely still. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. They started to hum. It was a low, monotone hum, like nothing I'd ever heard before. Not quite singing, not quite mechanical. It was the sound of multiple voices in perfect unison, a single droning note that seemed to vibrate through the walls of my apartment. It was the most unsettling sound I've ever heard in my life, and it sent waves of primal terror through my entire body. I ran to the back of my apartment and locked myself in my bedroom. I could still hear the humming. It seemed to come from everywhere, like it was seeping in through the walls themselves. I sat on my bed, phone in hand, waiting for the police, convinced that if I opened that door, if I stepped outside my home, something terrible would happen to me. The sirens seemed to take forever, but they finally arrived. 2 police cars pulled up outside, their lights flashing red and blue. The sound of the sirens seemed to break the spell. The humming stopped abruptly. When the officers went to check my property, they found no one. No children, no teenagers, no mysterious figures in old-fashioned costumes. Nothing. The officers thought I'd been drinking. They were polite about it, but their skepticism was clear. They checked my apartment, found nothing, and suggested that perhaps I'd been stressed and my mind had played tricks on me. One of them mentioned that there had been some neighborhood kids playing pranks all evening. People reported seeing them in various costumes around town. But those officers hadn't seen what I'd seen. They hadn't heard that sound. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, my doors locked, my phone charged. By morning, I was exhausted but determined to act like everything was normal. I went to school and taught my classes. But I couldn't stop thinking about that girl's words. "They're coming to collect you." Collect me for what? That Halloween was 7 years ago. I haven't celebrated it since. I take the night off work and I stay home with all my doors and windows locked. I don't answer the door. I keep all my lights on. And every single year, around 8:30 in the evening, I hear something that sounds almost like humming in the distance. It never gets closer, but it's always there. A reminder that something is waiting. I've researched the history of my town. It used to be a Puritan settlement, and in the early 1700s there were witch trials here. Not as famous as Salem, but brutal in their own way. 13 people were executed, most of them children who'd accused their neighbors of witchcraft. A few years later, it was discovered that the children had been lying, fabricating accusations to gain attention and power. By then, the damage was done. 13 innocent people were dead. I've often wondered if that's what I saw. If the spirits of those executed children, or their accusers, come back every Halloween looking for people who haven't yet been collected, looking for the next names on their list. I keep waiting for Halloween to come around, and I keep wondering if this year will be the year they finally succeed. Sometimes I think I should move, leave town entirely, escape whatever curse or haunting has attached itself to me. But I suspect it wouldn't matter. Whatever saw me that night, whatever decided I was someone worth coming back for, would find me no matter where I went. So I stay. I wait. And every October 31st, I lock my doors, turn on my lights, and listen to the distant humming that grows a little bit closer each year. Story 4. The House on Crescent Lane. My name is Margaret, and I'm a real estate agent. I've been selling homes for 18 years, and I pride myself on knowing this city better than almost anyone. I know which neighborhoods are up and coming, which streets have good schools, which houses have problems hidden behind fresh paint and new flooring. I've learned to read a property the way some people read faces. But there was one house that I could never read. One house that didn't make sense, and that I wish I'd never stepped foot inside. It was 2004, and I was working at a mid-sized real estate firm in Charleston, South Carolina. Halloween was approaching, and I was getting ready to list several properties. One of them was a beautiful Victorian mansion on Crescent Lane, one of the oldest and most prestigious streets in the city. The house had been on the market for over a year without selling, which was unusual for a property of its caliber. The owners were desperate. They were relocating for work and needed to move quickly. They contacted my firm and asked if I could help them. I drove out to see it on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The house was exactly as described, a stunning 3-story Victorian with original hardwood, ornate crown molding, fireplaces in almost every room. The bones of the house were exceptional. But as soon as I walked through the front door, I felt something. An oppressive weight, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses always have character, and sometimes that character manifests as a certain atmosphere. But as I walked through the rooms taking notes, that feeling intensified. There was something fundamentally wrong with the house. I couldn't articulate what it was, but my instincts, which had served me well for nearly 2 decades, were screaming that I didn't want to spend more time in that building than absolutely necessary. The master bedroom was on the 3rd floor. I made my way up the narrow staircase, noting the beautiful oak railings and the stained glass window on the landing. But as I climbed higher, the weight I'd felt downstairs seemed to multiply. By the time I reached the 3rd floor, I could barely breathe. The master bedroom was expansive, with a bay window that looked out over the street below. The room was empty except for a few pieces of old furniture that the previous owners had left behind. I was standing in the center of the room, making notes on my tablet, when I noticed something odd about the closet. The closet door was slightly ajar, and there was a darkness coming from inside that seemed somehow deeper than it should be. It was a darkness that the afternoon sunlight filtering through the bay window didn't penetrate. I approached it slowly, my heart rate increasing with each step. I reached for the door handle, and I felt it. Cold. Impossibly cold, like touching metal that had been left in a freezer. I yanked my hand back, and that's when I heard it. A sound from inside the closet. A sound like breathing, slow and deliberate. Wet somehow. Like someone breathing through a throat full of fluid. I slammed the closet door shut and ran from that room. I went downstairs as quickly as I could, not bothering to check the other rooms, not bothering to finish my assessment. I got to my car, locked the doors, and just sat there for 10 minutes, trying to calm my racing heart. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I'd heard something, probably an animal in the walls, probably just the old house settling. These were rational explanations. But I didn't believe them. I called the firm when I got back to the office and told them I couldn't list that property. My boss was frustrated. He asked what was wrong with it. I couldn't give him a good answer. How could I? What would I say? That I heard something creepy in a closet? That I had a bad feeling about it? These weren't professional reasons to walk away from a commission. My boss assigned the property to another agent, a younger woman named Rachel who was eager to prove herself. Rachel was skeptical of my concerns. She said I was probably just tired. She listed the property the next week. It took 2 months to sell. The buyer was a couple from out of state who were relocating. They seemed thrilled with the house. The sale went through, the closing happened, and I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks before Halloween that year, I got a call. It was Rachel. She was crying, and she was barely coherent, but she managed to tell me that the couple who bought the house on Crescent Lane had hospitalized themselves voluntarily at a psychiatric facility. They'd been found by neighbors screaming in their front yard at midnight, completely incoherent. They'd been rambling about something in the master bedroom closet, something that had been calling to them, something that had nearly convinced them to do terrible things to themselves. The authorities investigated. They searched the house, including the closet. They found nothing. No animals, no evidence of anything unusual. The couple was deemed to have experienced some kind of shared psychotic episode, possibly triggered by the stress of moving. They were treated, medicated, and eventually moved back to their home state. They never returned to the house on Crescent Lane. The property went back on the market. My boss called me. He asked if I'd reconsider listing it now that there had been some publicity around it. He said maybe it would generate interest. He was joking, I think, but the implication was clear. He wanted me to sell that house. I refused. I told him I was done with that property, and if he wanted it sold, he'd have to find someone else. My boss was furious, but he didn't push the issue. The firm eventually found another agent willing to take it on. That agent lasted 3 weeks before having a panic attack in the master bedroom and refusing to show the property again. The house eventually sold to an investor who planned to flip it. Construction crews came in, renovated everything, updated the wiring and plumbing, gutted and refinished the interior. That new owner sold it to another couple. That couple lasted 8 months before moving out, citing unspecified personal issues. Over the next decade, that house on Crescent Lane had 7 different owners. Every single one of them reported problems, though the specific issues varied. Some talked about hearing sounds. Others mentioned finding themselves drawn to the master bedroom closet, unable to explain why they'd gone there. One owner claimed to have woken up with no memory of the previous 4 days. Another found themselves compulsively rearranging furniture in the master bedroom, unable to stop despite their conscious desire to do so. Eventually, the house fell into disrepair. No one wanted it anymore. The price dropped significantly, but even with the reduced listing, there were rarely any showings. Real estate agents would show up to photograph it or do walkthroughs, but most wouldn't stay long. The house developed a reputation in our community. Not quite a haunted house, because there was no ghost story to tell, but something people avoided. Something fundamentally unhealthy. I never went back there after that first day in 2004. I've driven past it occasionally, and I've seen it sitting there, empty and deteriorating, like a wound that refused to heal. The Victorian charm had faded, replaced by a kind of creeping wrongness. The paint peeled, the windows grew dark and clouded, the garden became overgrown with weeds. Last year, 20 years after I first stepped foot in that house, I was discussing local real estate history with a colleague. We were talking about difficult properties, problem houses that had caused trouble over the years. I mentioned the house on Crescent Lane, and my colleague nodded knowingly. He told me he'd been researching the property's history for fun, and he'd discovered something interesting. The house had been built in 1887, and its first owners were a wealthy merchant and his wife. According to records, the merchant had had a mistress, a young woman whom he kept hidden in the house. Specifically, he kept her locked in the master bedroom closet, She'd lived there for 5 years before neighbors discovered her during a visit. She was malnourished, barely coherent, and traumatized beyond repair. She spent the rest of her life in an asylum, never speaking a coherent sentence again. The merchant's wife had known about the woman in the closet. She'd been part of the arrangement, complicit in the imprisonment. According to the court records, when the woman was discovered, the wife said something that had been documented at trial. "She likes it in there. She wouldn't leave even if we opened the door. That closet has claimed her. It will claim anyone it wants to claim." I felt physically ill when I heard that story. I understood then what I'd sensed in that house. I understood what I'd heard in that closet. I understood why no one could stay there, why everyone who entered that master bedroom felt something pulling at them, drawing them toward that dark space. I haven't seen the house on Crescent Lane in years. I've deliberately avoided driving down that street. I don't know what happened to it. Maybe it was torn down. Maybe it's still standing, still empty, still waiting. All I know is that some properties have a darkness that goes deeper than paint and plaster. Some places have absorbed so much human suffering that they become fundamentally corrupted. I've sold hundreds of homes since that day in 2004. I've helped families find their dream houses. I've helped investors turn profits. I've been part of countless transactions. But I've never forgotten that house on Crescent Lane. I've never forgotten the cold of that closet door or the sound of that breathing. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if that house is still calling. I wonder if it's still trying to pull people into that master bedroom closet, still trying to find someone to claim. I wonder if, even now, there's a real estate agent somewhere in Charleston showing that property, feeling that inexplicable dread, hearing that wet, deliberate breathing from inside the darkness. And I hope, sincerely, that they run. I hope they run and never look back, the way I did all those years ago. Story 5: The Campfire. My name is Thomas, and I'm a wilderness guide in Northern California. I've spent the last 23 years leading groups through forests, teaching people about survival skills, leading backpacking expeditions, and conducting nature tours. I love the woods. I love the solitude, the vastness, the feeling of being part of something much larger than myself. I know the forests in this region better than almost anyone alive. I can read the land like a book. But there are places in these woods that I've learned never to go, lessons I learned the hard way on a Halloween night in 2001 that I'm still trying to process. I was 20 years old at the time, and I was guiding a small group of 8 people on a week-long backpacking trip. The group included a mix of experience levels, 2 experienced hikers, 3 casual outdoors people, and 3 complete beginners. We were heading into a region of the Cascade Range that was beautiful but relatively remote. The trip was scheduled to conclude on Halloween night, with plans to camp one final night and then head back out the next morning. Our last camp was set up in a valley that I'd used dozens of times before. It was a perfect spot, flat ground, access to water, protected from the wind by surrounding ridge lines, and with a spectacular view of the valley spread out below us. We arrived around 4 in the afternoon on October 31st. I set up my tent, helped the less experienced hikers with theirs, organized the communal cooking area, and started preparing dinner for the group. Everyone was in good spirits. The hike had been challenging but rewarding, and people were excited to sit around a campfire for the evening, celebrate Halloween in the wilderness, and relax before the final day of hiking back to civilization. We ate dinner around 6 o'clock, and afterward, as dusk was falling, I started building a campfire. I was gathering wood from the tree line when I noticed something odd. About 200 yards away, across the valley floor, there was another fire. I was certain it hadn't been there an hour ago. I would have seen the glow of it or smelled the smoke. But there it was, a campfire, clearly visible in the growing darkness, burning about a quarter mile away. I called out to my group and pointed it out. Everyone gathered to look at it. "Is that another group?" one of the hikers asked. "Possibly," I said, though my instinct told me otherwise. The spot where that fire was burning wasn't an official campsite. It was rough terrain, difficult to access, and in my 20-plus years of guiding in these mountains, I'd never seen anyone camp there. I'll check it out after we finish here. Maybe they need help or supplies. We continued with our campfire, and I kept an eye on the distant fire across the valley. It burned steadily, not moving, not changing. Around 9 o'clock, I told my group I was going to walk over and check on the other campers. It was only about a 20-minute hike across the valley floor. A couple of the more experienced hikers offered to come with me, but I insisted on going alone. I figured whoever was over there might not feel comfortable having a group of people approach them in the dark. I grabbed a flashlight, told the group I'd be back within an hour, and started hiking across the valley. The terrain was rocky but passable. I hiked steadily, keeping my eyes on the distant fire. As I got closer, I could see that the fire was larger than I'd initially thought. It was a substantial blaze, the kind that took a good amount of effort to maintain. But as I got within 100 yards, I noticed something that made me slow my pace. There was no one around the fire. I could see the fire clearly now, flames reaching high into the night sky, but there was no person sitting next to it, no silhouettes of people moving around it. Just the fire, burning in the middle of what appeared to be a small clearing, with absolutely no one tending to it. I approached slowly, my flashlight scanning the area around the fire. The closer I got, the more certain I became that the site was abandoned. There were no backpacks, no sleeping bags, no camping equipment of any kind. Just a fire, burning alone in the darkness. That's when I heard the sound. It was a voice, and it was coming from the darkness behind me. A woman's voice, calling my name. Thomas, it said. Just my name, in a tone that was somehow both familiar and utterly wrong. Thomas, come back. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I saw nothing. Who's there? I called out, my heart rate spiking. Come back to the fire, the voice said again. It seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. Come back and sit with us. With who? I shouted. Who's there? The ones who died here, the voice said. And then there was laughter. Not one person laughing, but multiple voices, overlapping, a chorus of laughter that seemed to echo across the valley. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran. I ran back across the rocky terrain, my flashlight beam bouncing erratically in front of me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I could hear the laughter continuing, and that voice calling my name over and over. Thomas, come back. Thomas, come back. I ran back to my camp and immediately began waking up the group. I told them we were packing up immediately, leaving the tents, leaving everything non-essential, and heading back down the mountain in the dark. People were confused, asking questions, but something in my voice must have conveyed the urgency because they didn't argue. Within 20 minutes, we had the essentials packed into backpacks and we were heading down the trail. I navigated by the light of my flashlight and memory, moving as quickly as I safely could in the darkness. Behind us, I could see the distant fire still burning in the valley. It seemed to be getting brighter, larger, like it was growing. And occasionally, when the wind was right, I could hear that sound again. That voice. That laughter. We made it to the trailhead by around midnight. Everyone was terrified and confused. People asked me what was happening, why we'd abandoned camp, what that fire had been. I told them I'd seen something that indicated a wildfire might be starting, and I'd made the judgment call to get us out of the area. It wasn't the full truth, but it was the only explanation I could give without sounding insane. The next morning, I reported the fire to the Forest Service. They sent out a team to investigate. They found nothing. No fire, no evidence of a fire, no abandoned campsite. They said it was possible I'd seen a reflection or some natural phenomenon, but there was no indication that there had been any fire in that location. I didn't go back to that valley for 3 years. When I finally did, I went alone during daylight hours to investigate. The clearing where the fire had been was covered in overgrown vegetation. It didn't look like anyone had been there in decades. But as I was examining the area, I found something that made my blood run cold. Deep in the trees at the edge of the clearing, I found bones. Animal bones, scattered and weathered. And mixed in with them, partially buried in the earth, were fragments of what looked like human remains. I reported it immediately. The authorities investigated and found that there had been a hiking accident in that exact location in 1987. A group of hikers had gotten lost. One woman, Margaret Chin, had separated from the group trying to find help. She was never found. The other hikers made it out and reported her missing, but despite extensive searches, her body was never recovered. Her name was Margaret. The voice I'd heard calling me had called itself by no name, but somehow I knew. The woman in that fire was Margaret Chin, the hiker who died in those mountains 14 years before I heard her voice. I've been back to that valley twice since then. Both times were during daylight, both times were explicitly to look for that spot again. I wanted to understand what I'd experienced. Both times, I found the clearing in a slightly different state of overgrowth, as if time wasn't progressing normally there. And both times, as the sun began to set, I heard that sound again. That voice calling my name from the darkness. I've never gone back there at night, and I've advised every group I've guided since then to avoid that valley entirely. I've made up various excuses: unstable terrain, dangerous wildlife, trail closures. None of my clients has ever questioned it. They can sense something wrong about that place. I'm convinced now that there are places in these mountains where the line between the living world and something else has worn thin. Places where people who died violently or in despair have left an impression on the land itself. Places where, on certain nights, particularly Halloween, though not only then, those impressions can reach out and try to pull the living into their darkness. I still guide in these mountains. I still love the wilderness. But there's a part of me that's always listening now, always aware that I'm not alone in these forests. And I'm always careful to be back at camp well before the sun sets, never straying far from the light of the fire, and never, ever answering when I hear voices calling my name from the darkness. Story 6: The Mirror. My name is Stephanie, and I'm a college student. I'm 19 years old, and I'm majoring in art history at a university in New England. I've always loved antiques, old things, the history embedded in objects. That's what drew me to thrift stores and estate sales. That's also what led me to the worst decision I've ever made in my life. This happened just last year, on Halloween 2023. I was living in a house off campus with 3 other students. It was an old Victorian-era home that had been converted into a student rental. It was cheap, which was why we'd taken it, despite the fact that it had a creepy, rundown quality that none of us wanted to admit bothered us. The landlord rarely came around, which suited us fine. About a week before Halloween, I went to an estate sale in a neighboring town. An old woman had passed away, and her entire house was being cleared out. I wasn't particularly interested in most of the items, but in the basement, I found a large mirror. It was beautiful, an ornate gold frame, probably from the 1920s or 1930s, with intricate detailing and a massive reflecting surface. The mirror itself had some aged spots and discoloration, but it was still striking. The estate sale was ending, and they were practically giving things away. I bought it for $15. I brought it back to my house and hung it in my bedroom. My roommates thought it was cool. It really did add a certain elegance to the room, despite the rest of my dorm-like surroundings. I loved looking at it, studying the craftsmanship of the frame, imagining who had owned it, and what they'd seen reflected in it over the decades. About a week after I hung the mirror, strange things started happening. It started small. I'd look at the mirror and see myself standing slightly differently than I was actually positioned. If I was standing to the left, my reflection appeared to be more centered. If I was facing straight ahead, my reflection seemed to be angled. At first, I thought it was just an issue with the old glass, some distortion or warping. But the distortion was too consistent, too deliberate. Then I started noticing that my reflection was moving slightly out of sync with my actual movements. Not dramatically, just a delay of a fraction of a second. I'd raise my hand, and a split second later, my reflection would raise its hand. I'd blink, and my reflection would blink just slightly after I did. I tried to tell my roommates about it, but they didn't see what I was seeing. They'd stand in front of the mirror with me, and they swore everything looked normal. But when I looked at the mirror alone, I could clearly see the delay, the slight misalignment between me and my reflection. About 2 weeks before Halloween, things escalated. I was getting ready for bed one night, and I looked at the mirror to brush my hair. I was wearing my typical sleep clothes, a t-shirt and pajama pants. My reflection was wearing the same thing, or so I thought. But as I stared, I realized the clothing was slightly different. The reflection was wearing an older style of sleep garment, something that looked like it was from decades ago. Flannel, with a different cut. I blinked, and it was gone. My reflection was back to wearing what I was actually wearing. I told myself it was my imagination. Stress from school, late nights studying, my mind playing tricks on me. I kept the mirror on my wall, but I started avoiding looking directly into it. If I had to see my reflection, I'd glance at it peripherally, quickly, without really focusing. As Halloween approached, things got worse. I started having dreams about the mirror. Dreams where I was standing in front of it, but my reflection wasn't me. It was a woman I didn't recognize, a woman who looked like she was from the 1930s or 1940s, based on her hair and makeup. In the dreams, she would smile at me, and her smile was warm but sad. She'd mouth words that I couldn't hear, but her lips seemed to form the same phrase over and over. "Let me out." I'd wake up from these dreams in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. The dreams were so vivid, so real, that it took me several minutes to convince myself they were just dreams. On Halloween night, things came to a head. I was alone in my house. My roommates had gone to a party, and I'd decided to stay home and hand out candy to trick-or-treaters. I turned the porch light on, but there were no visitors all evening. Around 10 o'clock, I gave up and went to my room. I was sitting on my bed, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed something odd. The mirror was reflecting my room, but not quite correctly. The perspective was off. The room in the reflection looked deeper, more expansive, than my actual room was. The walls seemed to extend farther back than they should have. I got up and walked closer to the mirror. As I did, I saw my reflection move, but it wasn't moving in perfect sync with my movements. It was moving independently, deliberately. My reflection was standing in what appeared to be the same room, but the background was different. The mirror I saw in my reflection was different too. It was the same ornate gold frame, but the glass in it showed something else entirely. It showed a hallway, a long hallway lined with doors. I stepped back from the mirror. My reflection stayed where it was. It wasn't following my movements anymore. It was just standing there, looking directly at me, with an expression of infinite sadness on its face. "Please," my reflection said. Its lips moved, and I could hear the words as if they were being spoken directly to me, though the voice was coming from inside the mirror. "Please let me out. I've been trapped here so long. So many mirrors, so many reflections, moving from place to place. Please just let me out." I ran from my room. I went downstairs and locked myself in the living room. My hands were shaking, my entire body was trembling. I called one of my roommates and asked them to come home. I didn't explain why. They could hear the panic in my voice and agreed to leave the party. While I was waiting for them, I went back upstairs. I don't know why. Some part of me needed to see if what I'd experienced was real or if I'd imagined it. I opened my bedroom door slowly and looked at the mirror. My reflection was no longer me. It was a woman, the same woman I'd seen in my dreams. She was wearing clothing from the 1930s, her hair was styled in waves typical of that era, and she was pressing her palms flat against the glass of the mirror from the inside, as if trying to push her way out. When she saw me looking, her mouth opened in what might have been a scream, but I heard no sound. Then she started pounding on the glass, harder and harder, her face contorting in what looked like desperation and rage. I slammed my bedroom door shut and ran downstairs. My roommates arrived about 10 minutes later. I told them I wanted the mirror gone. I didn't explain why. We took it down from the wall, wrapped it up, and carried it out to the curb. I told them to put it in the trash. The next morning, the mirror was gone. The garbage collection had come during the night. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. But 3 days later, something happened that made me regret getting rid of it, or at least made me understand that simply removing it didn't solve anything. I was in the dining room, looking at the wall with a glass frame hanging on it, just a picture frame, nothing special. As I looked at it, I saw my reflection in the glass, and the reflection was smiling at me. The same sad, desperate smile I'd seen in the mirror. It's been a year now since Halloween. I've become hyper-aware of every reflective surface. Mirrors, windows, glass frames, even still water. And in each one, occasionally, I catch glimpses of her. The woman from the 1930s. She's always trying to reach me, always pressing against whatever surface is reflecting her, always mouthing those same words. Let me out. I've tried to research the mirror's history. I went back to the estate's sale and asked questions about the woman whose house it came from. They told me her name was Eleanor Mitchell. She'd lived alone for 40 years, rarely left her house, and when she died, she was found in her bedroom, sitting in front of that exact mirror. The cause of death was never clearly determined. The coroner said her heart had simply stopped, but there was something in his report about finding scratches around her fingernails, as if she'd been clawing at something. I now understand what that mirror was. It was a prison, and Eleanor Mitchell was the prisoner. I don't know how she ended up trapped in there, or what put her there, but I know that by buying that mirror and bringing it into my home, I somehow connected myself to her, and to whatever curse is bound to that reflective surface. I'm considering dropping out of school. I can't focus on my classes when I'm constantly aware of her presence, constantly catching glimpses of her in reflections. My roommates think I've lost my mind. I've stopped going out in public because being around mirrors and reflective surfaces has become unbearable. I'm considering moving to a remote location, somewhere with minimal reflective surfaces, somewhere I might escape her gaze. But deep down, I know it won't help. I know that I've become connected to her in a way that can't be undone. And I'm terrified that one day, when I look at my reflection, I won't see myself looking back. I'm terrified that I'll see her face where my face should be, and that the mirror will have finally succeeded in making the trade. That she'll finally be out, and I'll be the one trapped inside the glass, looking out at a world I can no longer touch. Story 7: The Costume. My name is James, and I'm a forensic psychologist. I work with law enforcement agencies, analyzing criminal behavior, profiling suspects, and occasionally consulting on cold cases. I've spent my career studying the darkest aspects of human nature, and I pride myself on my ability to remain objective and detached from the horrific things I encounter. That professional distance has served me well throughout my career. But there's one Halloween, 9 years ago, that shattered my confidence in my own ability to understand human behavior, and reminded me that some things defy rational explanation. I was working as a consultant for the FBI at the time, attached to a field office in Denver, Colorado. In late October 2015, I was brought in on a peculiar case. A man named Derek Walsh had been arrested for a series of home invasions spanning over 2 years. What made the case unusual wasn't the crimes themselves. They were burglaries, nothing violent, but rather the pattern of how the crimes occurred. According to witness testimony and security footage, the man who committed these burglaries always wore the same costume. A very specific costume. A plague doctor costume, with the long beaked mask and the period clothing. He wore it to every single crime scene. Not as a disguise, but almost deliberately, as if he wanted to be recognized. As if the costume itself was the point. I was brought in because law enforcement wanted to understand why Walsh had chosen this particular costume. Why he felt compelled to wear it every time he broke into homes. Was it a signature? Did it represent something psychological? Was it connected to a childhood trauma or obsession? I interviewed Walsh at the federal detention facility where he was being held. He was a thin man in his late 40s, quiet and composed. He didn't deny the crimes. He cooperated fully with questioning. But when I asked him about the costume, his demeanor changed. His eyes went distant, and he spoke about it with what I can only describe as reverence. "I don't choose to wear it," he told me. "It wears me. Every time I put it on, I'm not Derek Walsh anymore. I'm someone else. Something else. And that other thing, it needs to go places. It needs to see inside homes, to understand what's in them. The burglaries are almost incidental to that. The real purpose is the observation." I asked him what he meant. He said that when he wore the plague doctor costume, he could see things that Derek Walsh couldn't see. He could sense things. He said he was looking for something, though he couldn't articulate what. He said it was almost like the costume was looking through his eyes, using him as a conduit. I noted this as obvious delusional thinking, possibly schizophrenia with costume-related dissociation. I wrote my report and submitted it to the field office. Walsh was convicted and sentenced to 8 years. The case was closed, and I moved on to other consulting work. But 2 months later, something strange happened. I was at home, in my apartment in Denver, getting ready for a departmental holiday party. I was in my bedroom, going through my closet, trying to decide what to wear. At the back of my closet, hanging on a hook, was a costume. A plague doctor costume, complete with the beaked mask and the period clothing. I had no memory of buying it. I had no explanation for how it got there. I immediately thought of Derek Walsh. I wondered if someone had planted it there, if this was some kind of joke or intimidation tactic. But when I examined it, the costume was clearly old. The fabric was worn, the leather of the mask was cracked and weathered. This wasn't something that had been purchased recently. I took it down and examined it more closely. Inside the mask, there was a label. It was faded, barely legible, but I could make out a name written in what appeared to be permanent marker. The name was Derek Walsh. The same name as the man I'd interviewed. The same name as the criminal I'd profiled. My hands started shaking. I carefully placed the costume back in my closet and called the field office. I spoke to Agent Morrison, who'd been leading the Walsh investigation. I asked him if anyone had mentioned anything about multiple plague doctor costumes, if Walsh had claimed to own more than one. Agent Morrison said no. Walsh had only one costume. It had been found in his apartment and was currently being held as evidence. There was no mention of a second costume. I hung up and immediately checked my apartment's security footage. I had cameras installed at all the entry points. I reviewed the footage from the past several weeks, looking for any sign of an intruder. I found nothing. No one had broken in. The footage showed no one entering my apartment during that entire period. That night, I didn't go to the holiday party. I stayed home, and I spent the evening researching the plague doctor costume. I wanted to understand its history, its significance, whether there was something about the costume itself that might explain what was happening. What I found disturbed me greatly. The plague doctor costume was based on the protective garments worn by physicians during the Black Death in medieval Europe. The long beaked mask was believed to help filter contaminated air. The costume was meant to protect doctors from disease. But throughout history, the plague doctor image had taken on sinister connotations. It appeared in folklore, in stories, as a symbol of death itself. In some traditions, the plague doctor wasn't a healer at all, it was a harbinger, a supernatural entity that walked the line between the world of the living and the world of the dead. I found references to the costume in anthropological literature, in folklore studies, and in historical texts. But I also found something else. I found references to it in criminal psychology journals. There was a pattern, going back decades, of serial criminals who had worn plague doctor costumes. Each criminal, when interviewed, claimed that they didn't choose to wear the costume, that it wore them. Each claimed that something else was using the costume, using their body as a vessel. I printed out everything I could find and spread it across my kitchen table. The pattern was unmistakable. The plague doctor costume had appeared in connection with criminal activity across multiple decades, multiple countries, multiple time zones. And every person who had worn it claimed the same thing, that they were no longer in control when they put it on. I knew I needed to get rid of that costume. I drove to a secluded area outside of Denver and threw it into a ravine. I watched it fall, tumbling through the air until it disappeared from sight. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. That relief lasted exactly 3 days. On the 3rd day, I came home from work to find the costume hanging in my closet again. Exactly where it had been before. Untouched. Perfectly preserved. As if I'd never thrown it away. I called Agent Morrison again. This time, I told him everything. I told him about finding the costume, about the research I'd done, about the pattern of plague doctor-associated crimes. I asked him if he thought Walsh might have some way of leaving objects in my apartment, some kind of contact from inside the prison where he was being held. Agent Morrison was skeptical, but he took it seriously. He ordered a welfare check on Walsh. When the guards went to check on him, they found him in his cell, unresponsive. Walsh had had some kind of seizure or stroke. He was in a coma. He remained in that coma for 3 weeks before dying without regaining consciousness. The day Walsh died, I came home to find the costume sitting on my bed. Not hanging in the closet. Placed deliberately on my bed, as if waiting for me. I took it out of my apartment immediately. This time, I didn't throw it away. I brought it to the FBI field office and handed it to Agent Morrison. I explained the situation, the pattern, everything I'd discovered. I asked the Bureau to store it, to keep it somewhere secure, somewhere locked away. Agent Morrison agreed, though I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He thought I was having some kind of breakdown. But he took the costume and placed it in an evidence locker. 3 weeks later, it appeared in my apartment again. At this point, I accepted that I couldn't get rid of it. Something about the costume had attached itself to me, just as it had attached itself to Derek Walsh and countless others throughout history. I've been living with that costume for 9 years now. I keep it in my bedroom closet, and I do my best to ignore it. But I've noticed that the more I ignore it, the more it seems to call to me. And every year, as Halloween approaches, the urge to put it on grows stronger. It's not a conscious desire. It's something deeper, something primal. My hands will reach toward it when I'm not paying attention. I'll have dreams about wearing it, about seeing through its beak mask at a world that looks fundamentally different when viewed through that particular lens. I've stopped doing criminal profiling work. I can't trust my judgment anymore. I can't be certain whether the insights I'm having are my own or if they're coming from something else, something that views the world through the plague doctor's perspective. I've gone to psychiatrists, neurologists, sleep specialists. None of them can find anything wrong with me. My brain scans are normal. My chemical levels are balanced. I'm not delusional or experiencing a psychotic break. And yet I know, with absolute certainty, that something is wrong. Something fundamentally wrong. Every Halloween, I lock myself in my apartment. I don't answer the phone. I don't go outside. I sit in the center of my living room, as far away from my bedroom as possible, and I wait for the night to pass. Because on Halloween night, the urge to put on the costume reaches its peak. I can feel it like a physical pressure, a weight pressing down on my chest, trying to force me into my bedroom, trying to get me to slip my arms into those sleeves, to pull that mask down over my face. So far, I've resisted. So far, I've been strong enough to say no. But I'm not sure how many more Halloweens I can hold out. And I'm terrified of what will happen on the night when I finally give in. What will I become? Where will I go? What homes will I visit? What will I be looking for? And most terrifying of all, will I remember being James when the sun comes up? Or will there only be the plague doctor, moving on to find the next person to inhabit, the next body to wear like a suit, the next vessel to carry it forward into the future?